What's going on, Tamers? It's me, Guy, in these Chaos Dramon trenches. And bro, with the decks running around, I am fighting for my life. But enough about my Chaos Dramon woes. Last week, we finished up the 11th week of the BT13 set over here in the Asia region. And it feels like things are finally starting to settle down with the addition of the new mulligan and the new training cards. You know that old adage, the more things change, the more they stay the same? Looking at recent events, it definitely feels that way for Digimon right now. That being said, let's take a look at some of the event results from last week, a couple of key takeaways, as well as a closer look at some of the decks that topped. Hopping into last week's results, it almost feels like we've been here before. Shine Greymon, War Greymon, and very closely followed by Beelzemon are all at the top again. These decks have now seen the inclusion of the new training cards, and even going up to my locals, I see that these decks are running rampant right now. Where we thought that, the Chaos Dramon stonks, the Mirage Galgamon stonks, and the Ulforce Digimon stonks are going to go crazy, this hasn't actually been the case, it seems like. These decks, again, Chaos Dramon, Ulforce Digimon, and Mirage Galgamon, have kind of been pushed down by the sheer power and speed of the decks that were strong before the new training cards. If I had to say out of those three that has been the biggest winner, despite the fact that the way the results look here, Mirage Galgamon is a very powerful deck, and with the new training cards being able to pull Tamers, it makes them being able to get to their OTK much easier. Although I do want to say that while Chaos Dramon and Ulforce Digimon aren't the strongest decks in the meta right now, they did receive a power boost as a result of those new cards. So again, we see these decks out here doing pretty well. And as we prophesized, the X-Antibody decks all saw big buffs here as well. We're starting to see the resurgence of things like Metal Garurumon X-Antibody. Grandis, of course, is still super strong and still receiving support in BT14. I don't know if you guys have seen any of the new BT14 releases, but they've been crazy so far, by the way. And then outside of that, most of the strong decks that you've come to know and love in the BT13 series, things like Royal Knights, Belphamon, Gallantmon are all still strong here. I will say that while the meta does feel very settled right now, people are still trying to do a little bit of experimenting with some of the older decks, things like you see here, a D-Brigade. Saw a couple wins last week, and it's an all-black deck. The defense training seems to work out really well there. Also, what's really interesting, and we'll definitely take a look at this one later, is going to be that Kazuchimon deck. And a lot of you folks actually out there talked about this deck in the comments below in previous weeks, so it's really cool to see someone actually build something and actually take a win with it. So if you're like me, and you're still trying to find a good yellow deck to take advantage of the new training cards, then stay tuned because we're definitely going to take a look at this Kazuchimon deck. And our first dive into some of the decks that topped last week is going to be the new versions of Shine Greymon. Now, Shine Greymon, already a strong deck beforehand. It can take advantage of either the red or the yellow training cards. This deck here specifically takes advantage of the red one, and I think that's honestly because here at the level 3s, we see a couple copies of Beelzemon. Normally, we would see Agumon X Antibody here at the level 3s, however, Beelzemon allows us to not only get one red Digimon, that's a vaccine, which in this deck is pretty much everything, I believe, but on top of that, also able to grab a Tamer. And if you know Marcus, then you know how important he is to get on the field as fast as possible. And while I will say that Beelzemon probably isn't the standard version of this deck, it is still a nice little inclusion here just because you get the dual searchability where the Agumon X Antibody only really gives you one thing. And between being able to Digivolve for cost -2 using the training cards and the free Digivolution that Marcus sometimes gives you, this deck really outpaces most of the stuff that's out there right now. The next deck we're going to dive into is going to be the updated versions of Metal Garurumon X Antibody. Now, I know for a long time this deck was a menace in the West, but seeing it rear its head again over here in Japan means that if you're playing in the West, once these training cards drop, you're probably going to see it again there too. This updated build has some pretty interesting cards in it. So first of all, we would normally see like 3 copies of the Hero Tamer to give you plus 2000 DP on attack. Instead, we're going to see 1 copy of the Kyoshiro Tamer, which is an interesting tech just to allow you to draw more cards whenever you have a level 5 that attacks. Outside of that, it's also hard to prioritize the Blue Memory Boost over the training card, so we're going to see an even split of 3-3 here. Pretty good choice in my opinion, considering this deck is mostly looking for Digimon, but the cheap Digivolve costs are also very welcome here. I do want to point out here that this is a little bit misleading. If you actually count the cards, this is 51 cards, but if you look very closely, this Nokia Tamer is actually in a super huge, like hard oversleeve. And a thing that players do in Japan is that they actually have like a place to rest your Digitama when they're hatched. And so that's what this Nokia Shiromine is here for. So they'll typically put that card in like a super huge, like really big oversleeve or like really big like card case so that people know that there's a different card that's not supposed to be used in play. And this Nokia Shiromine Tamer in English is probably a dead giveaway for that. Though I will say, that is a little sus, man. Oh no. And then finally, we see the promo Metal Garurumon here. I personally haven't used this guy much myself when playing this deck, but after looking over the effects, it kind of makes sense. 3 cost Digivolve makes him super cheap. Also, he allows you to draw more cards, which this deck definitely wants to do. And then on top of that, on your opponent's turn, they can't attack this guy. So if you somehow leave him rested and your opponent doesn't have any cards or effects to destroy Digimon, then he's going to stick around. And then one last thing here, I know it's kind of hard to see, but these are 2 copies of X Antibody and then 1 copy of Ice Wall. And the last deck we're going to take a look at today is going to be the Kazuchimon list that I talked about before. And the more I look at this deck, the more I love it. It does so many things right. The deck leans on a lot of the past archetypes for yellow that were really strong, things like the hybrid, so you see a lot of the yellow hybrid cards here, alongside things like the TK Tamer and then the dual TK and Hikari Tamer, just to get a ton of memory every single turn. You also have the new BT13 Yugioh Greymon, who allows you to search out a yellow tamer in your security, so you can get that out very cheaply, very quickly. And you can combo that off of the Takaru or the TK effect here as well to keep digging through your security. It also features some of the more recently released cards like the BT13 Kudamon, which allows you to search the deck for a tamer as well as a yellow vaccine Digimon. I think in this case it's most of this deck. I believe there's like very few yellow viruses. And then of course the counterplay of the Kyutomon here, being able to stop all the other trainer cards out there and let you have yours so your opponent gets locked out of reducing Digivolve costs. The main idea for this deck though is to get to your Kazuchimon, and using cards like Boutmon you can do that very cheaply. The promo Boutmon here allowing you to discard security cards to reduce the cost of the Kazuchimon here, and then once you get to that Kazuchimon you can gain memory and gain security attack +1 for the turn. So now that you're swinging for 2 security at a time, you can use cards like Electric Rush here to unsuspend your Digimon for 2 memory and then attack again. And because this deck pulls memory from so many places, and things like the TK Tamer, the dual Tamers here, as well as the yellow memory boost and the yellow training card, it looks like you're always going to have a little bit of spare memory to use to get the Electric Rush out. The inclusion of the Hyper Speed Plug-in D card here seems a little weird to me, just because your Katomon is already going to give you jamming if that's what you're really looking for. My assumption is that they're actually going to be using this just for the can't be blocked effect, where honestly it feels like now in the game so many Digimon kind of skirt this rule by just changing your attack target rather than blocking. It means that this card is going to see a little bit less use. Of course, if you are looking for a yellow build, I definitely start with this, and then after a couple of games see if you want to swap out that plugin for something else, or if it is a good inclusion, just keep it in the list. So that's going to wrap up this week's Japanese meta report, and while it hurts and pains me to say it, it feels like after the dust has settled, they are still keeping my man Chaos Dramon down, unfortunately. However, I will say within the next 2 weeks, I think it is, we're going to see the release of the new starter decks, the purple and black starter decks, that feature some of the new ace cards and counter mechanics for the game. And within those decks are some really good support for machine and cyborg type Digimon, so fingers still crossed here. Anyways, folks, I'm going to get out of here. Before you get out of here, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.